Hello, I'm Ruby. I'm just finished school and I'm already married and pregnant. Here's how it happened. Everything started a few years ago, just before I became a teenager. I came home from school one day and ran into some police officers who were leaving our apartment. My mom looked pale, and it was obvious that she had just stopped crying. It turned out that my dad had been hit by a bus, and we had lost him. What's there to say now? Of course, it was difficult to overcome this, for both my mom and I. We even started sleeping in the same bed after it happened, because most of the time I would have bad dreams about losing my dad over and over again, and my mom said she would never be able to sleep in their bedroom without him. Almost every night, I would hear her crying in the bathroom. I wanted to help her, to cheer her up, but I didn't know how to. It took us about a month, or maybe a little more, to start to live our normal lives again. But then I began to notice that something wrong was going on with my mom. She began drinking literally every day. At first, she said that she was doing it to be able to get better sleep, and I believed her. But one day, I found her sleeping nicely during the middle of the day, which actually meant that she was skipping work. The exact same situation repeated itself a couple more times, to the point that she'd gotten herself fired from 2 different jobs over the next 5 or 6 weeks. Each time she said she was so sorry and even tried to give up alcohol. But without it, she would start to act really aggressively and, unfriendly. This happened enough that at some point, our neighbors began to suspect something and called social services. I spent 111 days at the child care center waiting for my mom's rehabilitation. When she finally came to take me back home, she looked thinner, but overall healthy. I will never forget the emotions I had when I saw her through the window. I thought that my happiness was ready to spill out and influence everybody around me. I saw that she was enormously proud of herself for having quit her bad habit, and so was I. Together, we agreed that it was going to be hard to live in that apartment and beside those same neighbors again. So we packed up our stuff and moved to another city, to a totally different environment. It was a tiny town with those streets that have small houses. I remember how I was amazed by the view while my mom was driving us to our new home. I knew that our life there was going to be different, better, and I wasn't wrong, by the way. At least to some extent. Now, Mom had to work hard to provide a living for us, since the house we'd settled in, even though it was a relatively small one, was still a little more expensive than our old apartment. It didn't have a fancy white fence around it, like they did on the neighboring street, and there was practically no land, so we couldn't have a garden or anything around it. But I was really fond of our home, and I loved it from the very first time I saw it. We shared a fence with our nice neighbors, the Gonzalez family, and they sometimes looked after me when my mom had to stay late at work. They had 5 children, but only one of them, Enrico, was my age, and pretty soon we became friends. And Mr. Gonzalez reminded me of my dad a lot, with his mustache and bright eyes. Then, when I turned 13, I guess, my mom said that she had fallen in love. I began staying overnight at the Gonzalez's from time to time, and Mrs. Gonzalez kept saying that my mom had a right to have her private life, so I shouldn't be angry at her. It wasn't my mom who I was angry at, by the way. That boyfriend of hers, Bob, was awful. He wasn't tall or handsome. Actually, he reminded me a lot of a basset hound. I kept wondering why my pretty mom had even given him a second thought. I begged God to somehow get them to separate, but it might have been a bad prayer since soon afterward they got married and he moved in. While my mom seemed to be happy, my life turned into a nightmare. I'll give you some examples and you'll see. First of all, Bob didn't like any noise, so anytime he was at home, I was supposed to sit silently in my room or just leave the house. And he definitely thought that I was no longer a child and forced me to do the housework and to sort of serve him. I'll never forget the first time he demanded a sandwich. He asked my mom to bring it, apparently not knowing that she had already left for the grocery store. And when I told him that she wasn't there, he told me to bring him his lunch. I got lost and did it, but later I told my mom about everything. She said that it wasn't a big deal for me to feed my stepfather, and I would have probably agreed with her if this didn't keep happening again and again. You know, I love my mom, and I always thought that she deserved to be happy. But this time, I strongly doubted that this jerk Bob was her Prince Charming. I tried to talk to my mom about this, but she was sure she was in love. And then, after some time had passed, she told me that she was pregnant. I was excited about this news because I had always looked at my friend Enrico and his big friendly family, and I thought that I would like to have something like that in the future. But Bob was far from being the happy father-to-be. Day by day, he was getting more and more irritated and gloomy. From time to time, he would come home late and drunk, but more frequently, he was out of the house. I saw that my mom was upset by his behavior, and they fought a lot, whether it was over supper being cold or about a pair of pants that he couldn't find. From time to time, I noticed bruises on my mom's body, but she told me she was just a little bit clumsy. I still don't know why Mom decided to have the baby if Bob was against it. Nevertheless, she continued working, and I kept helping her with the household chores because the bigger the baby bump got, the harder it was for her to move, bend, and do other stuff like that. Sometimes Mom didn't feel very good, so I had to skip school and replace her at her work at the store so that she wouldn't lose her job. There was a guy at Mom's work, Cal. Yeah, he was actually my first love and the guy who would completely twist my destiny. But you have to wait till the end to find out what happened. Anyway, he knew that I was just covering for Stacy. We decided to not say that I was my mom's daughter. And this was the only truth I was ready to tell him about my life. I lied about my parents. When we were talking about our families, I would talk about the Gonzaleses as if they were my real family. I just faked everything. My siblings, my parents, and my life. I saw how amazed Cal was while listening to my stories about family evenings and stuff, so I just kept lying. With time, we began seeing each other almost every day because it had become really hard for my mom to work in her condition. And very soon, I understood that he also liked me. I mean, a lot. One day, I came home and Mom and Bob were arguing loudly upstairs. I tried to close the door as quietly as I could and sneak into my room. But suddenly, I heard a wham sound, and after a few seconds, my mom fell down the stairs. Bob rushed to her while shouting at me to call 911. My hands were shaking, and for one single minute, I imagined that my mom was gone, and the fear that gripped my heart. As the doctor said, the fact that my mom fell down the stairs was fatal for the fetus. I won't even begin to tell you how devastating this information was for my mom. But you know what was interesting and a little bit scary? My mom didn't tell the police that Bob might have caused her to fall down the stairs. Neither did I, because I didn't actually see him do it. This was just my suspicion. I decided to talk to my mom and sort of tried to hint around that he might have done everything on purpose, but she didn't want to listen. She was like, "Oh no, you silly girl. It was an accident that I fell." She also said that every person has a different way of overcoming grief, but I seriously doubted that Bob was even sad about anything. In fact, his mood had gotten remarkably better, and I just couldn't stop assuming that it was because there wouldn't be any baby at home anymore. But since then, I began to sort of stay away from Bob, or at least tried to avoid being face to face with him. Mom had gone back to work, and even though it was tough for me, I had to break up with Cal. I was still afraid that he would figure out the truth, so I made up a story that my nice family and I were going to stay for a while in Europe, and that we wouldn't be able to see each other anyway. But a month later, I found out that I was pregnant. I rushed to talk to Cal, but he didn't believe me. He suggested that it wasn't his, saying that I might have gotten pregnant on my European trip and now just wanted to hold him accountable. I was devastated and totally lost, and I had nothing left to do but to tell my mom about everything. I think it would have been better if that news pissed her off or something, but she, on the contrary, just silently walked out of my room. Later that day, I found her drunk and sleeping on the couch. She had hit the bottle once again. Of course, Bob knew about my mom's addiction, and he got really pissed off when he came home later that day and saw everything. Believe me, I had no intentions of making our life any worse than it already was, but everything was my fault. At least, Bob said that when I told him about me being pregnant. He got so mad that I seriously thought he was going to find a way to get rid of the baby again. What if he accidentally also pushed me down the stairs? And then he screamed that if I decided to give birth to the baby, that he was going to give him or her up for adoption. I got scared and ran away to the Gonzaleses. I was crying hard and my whole body was shaking. I don't know what I would have done if Mrs. Gonzalez didn't hug me and try to calm me down. I could barely sleep that night, trying to figure out what I should do next. But in the morning, another surprise was waiting for me. We were all having breakfast together when Enrico suddenly decided to ask me to marry him. Mr. and Mrs. Gonzalez got completely silent, although they seemed to not be as surprised as I was. Enrico said that he had already set up a perfect plan for both of us. In 2 months, I was going to be 18 years old, and we'd be able to get married without our parents' permission, especially taking into account that I was already pregnant. It was the only way for me to escape from Bob's rights over me and my baby. He said that he would take this risk, at least for a while, until I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. There are no words to describe how grateful I am to this family. They saved me. We got married and moved into Enrico's granny's house to be far enough away from Bob. None of my family was at our wedding, and so far, none of them have called. And as far as I understand, their life hasn't changed much since I left. What do you think, guys? Is there any chance that after the birth of my baby, my mom will come and see me? Because I really miss her, despite everything.
Hey, I'm Alan. You know what's cooler than having a lot of money? Knowing how to make more. And I do. But yeah, you must think I'm full of myself. So let me share my story. I'm 17 now, but this all happened when I was 12. So my family is very poor. So poor that I wore the same shoes for an entire year, no matter whether it was raining or snowing. But those were good shoes. I mean, very durable ones. Like, they were the Iron Man of shoes. Nothing could destroy them. They were much better than my brother's, which made his feet hurt sometimes. But still, mine were very ugly, and I really wanted other shoes. I dreamed of having these sneakers I saw in a store. You may think that was shallow, but come on, I was 12, and there was nothing I could do about my wish to buy those shoes. I didn't have any money, so maybe I gave up on the idea. Nah, not really. I started to think that if I could just find a way of somehow making money, I could buy those shoes. And they weren't cheap. My dad was always saying that I should study better than him, so I could have a better life. And me and my younger brother really took his advice to heart. I was a really good student, because I spent so much time studying. I had good grades and no money, and some of my classmates had bad grades and a lot of money. So, I made them an offer. I would do their homework in exchange for money. Not a lot of money, but enough to save up and buy sneakers after a couple of months. It was pretty easy for me, because I basically had to do my homework and then copy it for them, changing it a little so nobody would know it was a copy. I even had different prices for A's, B's, and other grades. And I also helped older kids a little with some subjects, not like math, but literature and history. It was going great at first, but then almost everybody stopped paying. I was wondering why, and it turned out that they made one guy pay and then copied his homework. I had to fix this. So I told them that if they were going to do what they did, I was going to raise the price. They didn't like that, but they also didn't want to do their own homework. So they agreed, and everything went back to normal. But then one of the guys wasn't happy about it, and he actually told everything to the teacher. Can you believe that? The teacher was very angry at me and said that I should stop doing that or else me and the other guys would have a lot of problems. So I had to stop. But I still hadn't saved up enough for me to buy the sneakers I wanted. So of course, I came up with another plan. Because now, many of the older kids knew me, and their teachers didn't know about my tricks. I asked them to give me cool stuff in exchange for their homework. You know, like toys, action figures, simple gadgets. I would then start playing with them in my class, making it look like I was having a lot of fun. To be fair, it was fun, and if someone asked me to play with them, I would say no, which made them want it more and more. Then, at some point, I would rent it to them, or even sell it. Soon, I was buying stuff from the older kids and selling it for more money, instead of doing their homework, because I was getting tired doing so much homework. But, of course, sooner or later the parents started to notice, and the teacher was angry with me again, saying that I was abusing the other children, and it wasn't okay. I disagreed, because they were very happy with all of it, and I never, forced them to buy anything. Everyone was happy. But basically, I finally had enough money to buy the sneakers I had dreamed of for so long. So I bought them and went home. Finally, all my hard work was paying off. And even if I got into a lot of trouble, I still got what I wanted. Then, I saw my brother's shoes. They were in a way worse state than mine. And I remembered how many times he would say to me how much his feet hurt. And he was constantly sick because his shoes had a lot of holes in them and got wet every time he stepped into a puddle. So I gave those shoes to my brother, and he was so happy and surprised. Honestly, it was much better to see my brother happy than to have them for myself. My parents were angry at me because they thought I stole them, but I explained how I got them. And then they were proud of me because I did all of it for my brother. I didn't tell them that it was for me at first, though. During that time, I learned that making money is all about giving people what they want, even if they think they don't. And in the end, I didn't regret giving away the sneakers, for one simple reason. I enjoyed coming up with the ways to make money, and the process itself was very interesting to me. Now I'm 17, and me, my friends, and my brother are thinking about what kind of business we could do together. It's all very exciting, but it's not about the money. It's about being passionate and solving problems, about doing what you really love. Share the...
Hello, I'm Carly. I'm 17 now, but this story happened when I was 15. I refused to talk and to eat to get rid of my abusive parents who were poisoning my life. My whole life, my parents were not nice. They forbade me to do almost everything and would scream at me every time they got the chance. When I was 5, I got very sick and feverish. I couldn't even get up from my bed. But my parents thought I was faking it. When they were taking me to the doctor by bus, I was crying, but they told me that I was embarrassing them and that if I didn't stop, they would take me back. So I had to hold back my tears all the way there. When I started school, they wouldn't let me out of my room because they expected me to study all the time and then sleep. On the weekends, my parents would go out and make me stay home and clean the entire house. If I would refuse, they would scream at me and confine me to my room, the same as during the week. They would never let me talk. I had to be as silent as possible. So by the time I was 15, I had no friends at all, simply because I was afraid to talk to anyone. My classmates and even my teachers hated me because they thought I was weird. When I wished happy birthday to Emily, one of the girls from our class, and gave her a necklace I made myself, she laughed at it and threw it in the trash because it was ugly. I took it out of the trash and they continued to laugh at me, calling me a hobo. When a teacher asked me something, I couldn't answer because I was too scared. But they thought I was stupid. Every time I tried to explain my situation at home, they would get angry at me because I was coming up with excuses. So I gave up. I stopped talking at all. No more talking because it made everything worse. I also hoped that maybe someone would notice it and it would help me somehow. Every time a teacher asked me something, I stayed silent. They would get angry but then just forget about it and move on. During breaks, I would sit alone, but people would come to me trying to test my patience. One guy, Emmett, who would bully me a lot, would shout in my ear as loud as he could, trying to get a reaction from me. But I didn't do anything. Sometimes this guy would even come to my house and throw eggs at my window or some stuff like that. He really hated me. Emily and her friends would ask me questions, and when I didn't respond, they would physically push me. One day, they were all chewing gum and spat them out in my hair. I noticed it only after a few hours of people laughing at me. I gave myself a very short haircut, and it looked extremely ugly. At some point, they all gave up on me and left me alone because I wasn't reacting. The last one who talked to me was Emmett. He told me maybe if you stood up for yourself, you wouldn't be so pathetic. And finally, all this silence paid off. After numerous complaints, I was sent to the principal. He was asking me questions, but of course I didn't answer. He thought I was mocking him and called my parents. When they came, they were acting all nice and told him I was sick. I mean mentally. And that maybe I needed a month at home to heal and stuff. At this point, I remembered what Emmett said and I finally spoke up. I wanted to tell him everything about how I was abused my whole life. How I was like a slave in my own home and that they hated me. I wanted to speak for the first time in months, but my parents quickly shut me up by telling the principal that I just forgot to take my medication and that I just needed some time at home. The principal didn't care and agreed to let me stay at home. I was devastated. Even when I said something, it didn't help. My parents were screaming at me the whole way home, saying how embarrassed they were to have such a useless and ugly daughter. But I wasn't responding. Before, they didn't even notice that I wasn't talking. But now it got on their nerves. At home, they continued to scream at me, demanding that I start talking. But I didn't. It was a protest and the best thing I could do to annoy them. My mom took my favorite childhood toy, a bunny. Even at 15, I was still sleeping with him. She took him by the head and said, "Talk." I didn't, so she ripped his head off and threw him out the window. I could sew pretty well, so I ran outside to get him back, but my dad blocked my way and then took me to my room. They locked my door, demanding that I start talking, and they took away my phone and my books. I was laying down in an empty room, and the only thing I could do was look out of my window. To not go crazy, I was silently having conversations with myself. I also refused to eat to prove my point. At some point, they put a sandwich into my room. I was ready to bite it, but then I put it back. I decided that I wasn't going to eat. I only drank water occasionally. My parents kept berating and pressuring me, and all I wanted was for them to leave me alone. And I couldn't wait to move out when I turned 18. I even wrote them a letter explaining this, but they refused, thinking I would break. But I knew that sooner or later I would win this and get what I wanted. After a week of this, someone threw a stone at my window. It was Emmett. He was holding a piece of cardboard with "creepy idiot" written on it, and he was smiling. But when he saw me in my state, his smile disappeared and he dropped the cardboard. We looked at each other for a minute, and then he ran away. After a few days, the police came to our house. I don't remember any of it because I was at my limit. I only remember a lot of screaming and weird sounds. I was put in the hospital where I was fed through a tube. Doctors, psychiatrists, and social workers were coming to me, asking me questions. And I finally started speaking and told them everything. It was nice, but I still felt alone. I didn't know what exactly had happened, but I found out soon. One nurse told me a boy, the one who told the police, was coming every day and asking about me. They kept telling him he could visit me, but he always refused. I knew it was Emmett. Sometimes he would bring me chocolate or something like that, or wait for hours at the hospital, but he would never come in to actually see me. After some time, I was put into a foster home for a while, and I was much better and healthier. At some point, I was informed that my parents were put in jail. And you know what? I smiled. I was happy. Maybe it was cruel, but they deserved it. And then things got even better. I was put into another foster home, but it was in another city. I texted Emmett that I was moving away and that I wanted him to visit me while we still had the chance. And he came. We were just chatting outside. He never looked at me in the eye and just stood there holding his hands in his pocket. I asked him why he did what he did, if he hated me. He tried to explain that he never actually hated me, but strangely, he could not finish his sentence and changed the subject. After 20 minutes of us talking, Emmett left. He kind of awkwardly shook my hand. While I was watching him walk away, I was thinking that I didn't want him to leave, and that I finally had at least one reason to stay in the city. But I had to leave. My new foster family in another city was very nice, and I wasn't used to that. So at first, I was very closed off. But after a few months of consistent love and respect, I started to like them. I was trying to hold in my emotions because I knew at some point I had to leave this family and move on. Then, one evening, they asked me to sit down for a serious talk. I was ready to be told that I had to move again, and tried to be unemotional, but then they asked me if I wanted to be adopted by them. I burst into tears for the first time in years. I said yes, and they hugged me. I kept in touch with Emmett. We were chatting almost every day, and I was telling him how happy I was and how grateful I was for him. And then one day, he said he would come to my city to visit me, and I was so happy to hear that. But when he came, he hit me with some terrible news. Both of us were shy, but happy to see each other. I started to realize that Emmett liked me, and I liked him. And he didn't just come to visit. He ran away from home because he was tired of his parents, who were as abusive as mine. And he wanted to start working, and then he wanted me to move in with him. He confessed his love to me, something he wasn't able to do for years. He asked me to run away with him, to ditch school and finally to start living like we wanted to. I didn't know what to say. I finally had a loving family and friends, so I just shook my head. I asked him to try to finish school and then we could start a life together or something, but instead, Emmett just stood up and left. I was devastated because he disappeared from social media and I don't know where he is or what has happened to him. He probably felt betrayed by me. I will keep on studying and trying to get better so I can have a chance to lead a good life and help Emmett if he appears in my life again.
Hello, I'm Monica, and my stepmother hated me so much I had to move out. But let's start from the beginning. My mom died when I was around 3 years old, and it made my dad miserable because he loved her very much. For years, he was single, not even daring to start dating again. But when I was 14, he met Taylor. She kind of looked like my mother, but as I was told, she wasn't anything like her in terms of character. My dad asked me if I would be okay with this, and of course, I said yes because I wanted him to be happy. Soon they married, and Taylor moved in with us, together with her son James, who was 12 at the time. At first, everything was all right. My dad and Taylor loved each other very much, and James was quite easygoing. I hadn't seen my dad so happy in years. But soon, I started to notice how Taylor was manipulating him. She would always make him adapt to her lifestyle, and if she did something wrong, she turned everything around so it was my dad who was at fault. I wasn't having any of it, and Taylor disliked my attitude and started treating me badly and always blaming me if something happened. Even if James did something, it was my fault. For example, she would get angry at me because I didn't wash the dishes, even if there was only one dirty plate, and James ate from it. It was me who got lectured by Taylor, and that's the least of things she would say or do. At first, my dad was trying to defend me, but she eventually made him think that she was right and I was a spoiled, ungrateful kid. She told me that I was stealing our money, and it wasn't true. and I don't know where she got this idea from. By this point, our entire family turned on me. Taylor was as condescending as ever, and if I tried to defend myself, my dad would go, "Don't talk with your mother like that." I, of course, answered, "She is not my mother and she never will be," which would make my dad angry. And James listened to all of this and started to see me as a villain too, and Taylor was turning him against me as well. Why did Taylor do that? I guess she didn't like how much attention my father was giving me, which was understandable because I am his daughter. Ugh. Seeing how Taylor took over our lives, I tried to talk to Dad, but he wouldn't listen. So I approached my grandparents, explained them the situation, and asked if I could move with them. They said yes, and they also disliked Taylor very much. I moved out. Both me and Taylor were happy about it. Living with my grandparents had its own difficulties, but it was way better than living with Taylor. My dad would call me every day and visit every weekend at first, but then he called and visited less and less, probably because Taylor was whining about how he didn't love her. My dad was trapped, but it was his decision, and while I still loved him, I couldn't simply overlook how he treated me. After a year, it felt like I wasn't part of the family at all, and I saw my father 2 times a month at best. At worst, it could go for 2 months without him meeting with me. One day he called me and said, "Honey, please come home. I talked with Taylor and she is okay with that." Seriously? Taylor is okay with that? I rudely answered my father, "I would never even step into the house while she is still there." I expected my father to call, to apologize, to try to fix that, but it never happened. I understand that he was afraid to be lonely again, and I didn't mind him having a woman, but it wasn't okay how she treated me. Nothing helped, even when my grandparents tried to talk about it with him, so I completely gave up on it. 2 years had passed since, and he was still with her, and he was miserable again. By this point, I felt like my grandparents were my parents, and I had a lot of things going on in my life. My first serious boyfriend, school, and other stuff, so I didn't even think about it anymore. One day, to my surprise, James wrote me on Facebook. He was saying how sorry he was about how I was treated and that he didn't understand it at the time, but he wanted us to be friends, or at least not be enemies. I asked him what made him do that, and he told me all about his mom, Taylor, and how she only got crazier with time. Later, I met with James, and I was honestly proud of him because he was such a smart, good guy. He said that my dad was much better to him than his real dad ever was, and Taylor was mad every time he took his side. He said that he saw that father was tired, and maybe someday he would finally separate with her. James wanted us to be friends, even siblings, and support each other. And even if Dad and Taylor separated, he wished to stay in touch. I don't know what will happen in the future, and I'm still hurt about losing my dad, but at least I found a new family member who is a good person. I really miss my dad. Before Taylor, he was the best dad anyone could ever wish for. I hope that one day he would realize his mistake and that we can be a family again.
Hello, I'm Ruby. I'm just finished school, and I'm already married and pregnant. Here's how it happened. Everything started a few years ago, just before I became a teenager. I came home from school one day and ran into some police officers who were leaving our apartment. My mom looked pale, and it was obvious that she had just stopped crying. It turned out that my dad had been hit by a bus, and we had lost him. What's there to say now? Of course, it was difficult to overcome this, for both my mom and I. We even started sleeping in the same bed after it happened, because most of the time I would have bad dreams about losing my dad over and over again, and my mom said she would never be able to sleep in their bedroom without him. Almost every night, I would hear her crying in the bathroom. I wanted to help her, to cheer her up, but I didn't know how to. It took us about a month, or maybe a little more, to start to live our normal lives again. But then I began to notice that something wrong was going on with my mom. She began drinking literally every day. At first, she said that she was doing it to be able to get better sleep, and I believed her. But one day I found her sleeping nicely during the middle of the day, which actually meant that she was skipping work. The exact same situation repeated itself a couple more times, to the point that she'd gotten herself fired from 2 different jobs over the next 5 or 6 weeks. Each time she said she was so sorry